go down to the showrooms and purchase. The man who created all of this was Carl Fisher, the very same man who would later develop Miami Beach from swamplands into an exotic resort area. He also developed Montauk Point on Long Island and spearheaded the first drivable highway across the United States. We enter the track between turns 1 and 2 at the South End Short Straightaway. Up ahead is turn 2. There are 4 turns, each measuring exactly 1/4 of a mile from entrance to exit, and they are banked at 9 degrees and 12 minutes. The main straightaway, which we will be seeing in about 5 minutes, and the backstretch, coming up in just a moment, each cover 5/8 of a mile, so that the entire track is 2.5 miles around. From time to time along the way, you'll see some of the portions of the road course built between 1999 and 2000 and revised in 2008. It winds through the infield and links back up with the oval over to the northwest. On the right are the original VIP suites built in 1973.
The most exciting place to watch
we are riding on the very same 2.5 miles used by the drivers 100 years ago. Only the surface has changed. During the fall of 1909, down went 3,200,000 paving bricks, which is why the track still carries the nickname, the Brickyard. And where are the bricks today? Well, about 85% of the way around, they're still there, buried under several layers of asphalt. The most recent repaving job took place in the fall of 2004. If you think you may have spotted a golf course on either side of us, well, you have. It dates back to 1929. It's been revamped a couple of times since, most recently in 1993 by the world-famous Pete Dye, who used to live in Indianapolis. There are now 4 holes inside the track and 14 over on the right. The old course was once a major stop on the PGA Tour, the 500 Open being held between 1960 and 68. Each September between 1994 and 2000, the seniors played here. The 3-2-1 markers over on the outside fence are 100-yard reference points for entering turn 3. The 500 drivers will make the turn at about 220 miles an hour. The NASCAR drivers with cars which are double the weight will go through at about 170 miles an hour. The fastest laps ever completed here by 500 drivers have been right at 240 miles an hour. That means negotiating a 2.5-mile lap in less than 38 seconds. Or to put it another way, it's the equivalent of traveling down a football field in about 9/10 of 1 second. When we are in the turns, you can see the famed safer barriers up against the walls. They have done much to absorb the energy in the event of an accident resulting in wall contact. Safer barriers are coming into more and more use at major tracks, but the very first one was installed at this one in 2002. Carl Fisher had 3 partners, one of whom was James Allison, founder of the famed Allison Engineering. They sold the Speedway in 1927 to a group headed up by World War I flying ace, Captain Eddie Rickenbacker, who had in fact been a regular 500 driver before he ever learned how to fly a plane. In 1945, the track was sold to Anton Holman Jr. of Terre Haute, and it has remained in the Holman George family for over 60 years. And there's never been any tax dollars used here. The track is privately owned.
We stop here for a minute to give you some idea of this safer barrier right here on the walls, which has made racing much safer. However, SAFER is really an acronym. It stands for Steel and Foam Energy Reduction System. It was developed at the University of Nebraska. The outside portion, there's a section of this in the museum. The outside portions, these are hollow tubes of steel, about 3/8 of an inch thick, mounted on the blocks of high-density styrofoam, which is then mounted onto the original concrete wall. The object of the whole thing is to absorb some of the energy when a car hits. In the old days, they thought they built cars like, they built them like tanks. They thought they were doing drivers a favor. They were tubular steel. A car to hit that wall, it might lose a wheel or two, but it looked like you could almost drive it away. Something had to absorb that impact, and it was the body, and the body didn't do that too well. Plus, they were hardly, just barely strapped in, so your body was flailing around in there when you hit. And now we have really tremendous looking crashes. Cars almost disintegrate. Well, that's part of it, to help absorb some of that impact. And the drivers get out and walk away. A couple of years ago, Graham Rahal hit up here in the first turn at practice. Come onboard computer registered 120 Gs at the moment of impact, and he walked away. E.J. Vizo did it, I think, last year, about the same, 126 Gs, got out of it. So it's just tremendous what it has done to improve the safety of these cars, along with the system where they're strapped in so tightly and you can't flail around in there and bang into things. So we've come a long, long way in safety in that regard. I guess Jeff Gordon had a good crash the other day in stock car and got on television and said, "Oh, the safer barriers are incredible." That he hit it and hardly knew it. I mean, as far as he was concerned. So it's quite a remarkable feat. First used here. While we're here, I'll point out another landmark over here. Over here on the building is this hot air balloon painted over there. Building's known as the Miller Party Deck, so you could probably figure out what might go on up there at the event times. But in the 1960s, we had a hot air balloon lift off here as part of the festivities. That building wasn't there. The only thing out there were little wooden outhouses scattered around. And one of the balloons didn't lift off quite as anticipated. Gondola hit one of these outhouses and sent it tumbling, which was rather spectacular, but a little worse because there was a lady inside at the time. So she fortunately remains anonymous, but to commemorate life's most disastrous moment, we keep the hot air balloon painted over there. Term about something hitting the fan, well, for that poor lady, it sure did that day. She may have lifetime tickets to the Speedway, too. I don't know.
Over on the left are the final turns of the road course on their way to linking up again with the oval. Out of turn 4 and onto the main straightaway, corporate suites and double-decker grandstands. And can you imagine going all the way down there in 9 seconds? Drivers making pit stops used to drive all the way down the straight and pull over to their respective pit. In 1957, a separated pit lane was installed, and it may have been the first of its kind anywhere in the world. The current 500 cars have to stop several times during the race. They'll take on up to 22 gallons of fuel and change 4 wheels in less than 10 seconds. And they don't use gasoline. From 1965 until 2006, everyone used methanol. Starting in 2007, the 500 cars have run on ethanol. NASCAR, however, does use gasoline. The tall building on the left is called the Pagoda. It was completed in 2000. This is where the Master Control Tower stood from 1957 until 1998. And prior to 57, a Japanese-style pagoda occupied this spot. And that's the reason for this current design. This one, however, has 10 floors and rises to the equivalent of a 13-story building. At ground level, and slightly over to the left, is the current winner's circle for the 500 and the Brickyard 400, and just above it, the rostrum for the top 3 finishes in the MotoGP motorcycle race. The start-finish line isn't hard to locate. It's marked by a strip of bricks. As late as 1961, when A.J. Foyt won his first 500, the greater part of the main straight was still of bricks and mortar. And imagine that prior to the late 1930s, the entire 2.5 miles looked like that, and it made for a pretty rough ride.
Well, we're going to let you get out here in a second, but a lot of traditions around here.